One of the things I've enjoyed about you campaigning alongside Trump is the clarity of the messaging, moving away from rather diffuse, inane concepts like joy that the Kamala Harris campaign seemed to think, or turning the page. It was pointed out to me earlier that Kamala Harris is on the page that they're turning, and on the next, this woman, she's in government.
She wrote the page.
That's her page. That you brought to the forefront: health, ending war, and free speech. These seem obviously to be pressing and important issues. What in particular, in the event that there is a successful campaign and that you are granted the authority to do so, will you do about big food and big pharma? I was watching your video about the cereal the other day, you know, and like the sort of, someone said under there, like, well, people don't, you know, and I'm guessing this would be like I check you, man. I'll tell you. They goes, well, you don't have to buy that food. You don't have to buy that food. It's only an option. I was thinking, how can like a sort of a liberal democratic person make that argument? Do you know what addiction is? Addiction is the overriding of your compulsions, the overriding of your voluntary ability to choose whether or not to do something. I'm going to say this as an addict in recovery. I know you're public about your position. You know, you're a recovering addict as well. You know, that if our food has things in it that take away your ability to choose whether or not you're eating it anymore, and that's happening at scale and being marketed at children. These are sometimes, I think, when we're caught up in the culture war, you know, and it's easy to get caught up in the culture war. There are evocative issues around identity, and who cares more about anything they care about themselves these days? You know, like there are actually quite fundamental things being discussed, like the potential for war. And additionally, food and pharma, pivotal, fundamental issues. I've had the feeling that these interests are so entrenched, Bobby, that, you know, even if you're actually in government, you kind of can't do. You know, see, when you see Biden capping like 10 drugs or whatever and saying we beat Big Pharma this year, you think, why is the president in that kind of dynamic with pharma companies? If you're the president, aren't you just able to go, hey, stop marketing these unnecessary drugs, stop introducing new drugs that are essentially a rebrand, a white label? You know, so I get the sense that there are some pretty deep state and global corporatist powers in there. How do you oppose them things, Bobby?
And let me make a point just in answer to that. Yes, that suggestion that people have a choice. That they don't. All of the institutions of our government have been corrupted to remove the choice from the American public. And it's done in a series of very powerful, you know, in some of them subtle ways. For example, just not informing the public that there's poison in their food. Making the food addictive so that people don't understand the impact that it's having on them. So they don't have an informed choice. As you know, during the 1980s and 1990s, the tobacco companies were the richest companies, some of the richest companies in the world. And they came under tremendous pressure from the government that was then suing them. A bunch of the states, not the federal government, a bunch of the states began suing them. Class action suits to reimburse for Medicare bill. There was education programs to educate and discourage people from smoking, and they saw the writing on the wall. So they went out to diversify, and they took all that money, and they bought up all the food companies in our country, and they brought in thousands of scientists who had specialized in addiction, in creating addiction in tobacco. They brought those scientists into companies like Kraft and the big food company. The two biggest food companies by the end of the 1990s in the United States were Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, the two biggest tobacco companies. And they brought all their scientists who were making tobacco more addictive and hooking children. And they began making chemicals that addict you to foods. So monosodium glutamate, but hundreds of chemicals that are addicting and make food so that it doesn't satiate you, so that it actually keeps you hungry even when you're full. Oh. And these were chemicals that did not occur in nature. They were manufactured in labs. The human body has no way to process them. They're not actually food. They're food-like substances. At the same time, there's tremendous economic pressure for people to eat these foods. For example, hundreds of billions of dollars that go to the farm program every year. That money, 90% of that is going for 3 items: corn, soy, and wheat. And it makes those crop insurance, all these other programs, it makes those substances very, very cheap. And they became the feedstock. So GMO corn, GMO soy, and wheat, which are heavily laden with pesticides, and became the feedstock for this new processed food industry. And because they're so cheap, they're government subsidized. We spend only about 2% of the farm program goes to fruit and vegetables. Most of it goes to these big GMO, heavily pesticide-laden and intensive grains that then become, are put through extruders and other processes. They're filled with sugars, which themselves are addictive. Sugar is, Mark Hyman has shown, it's as addictive as crack. And that became the basis for the food program. So it's the cheapest food. In many neighborhoods in our country, particularly poor neighborhoods, are food deserts. You can't get a Whole Foods anywhere near it. The only food that you have access to is these kind of foods, these processed foods. And that's why Black Americans and American Indians have the highest chronic disease rates of anybody in the world. They had the highest death rates from COVID because it was actually chronic disease that was killing people from COVID. There's other mechanisms too. The food stamp program, which is $80 billion a year, most of that, about $70 billion of that, goes to processed food. So if you're poor, it's the food that you're encouraged and the government pays for. And the school lunch program, which for many kids in this country, the only decent meal they're getting every day is school lunch. And that now, about 70% of that is processed food. Yeah, you can say people have choice, but they don't have a choice. It's like saying they had a choice to vaccinate during COVID. They did have a choice. You could go into isolation and you could lose your job and but there were a lot of penalties built in to coerce that choice. And there are economic penalties, they're physical and cultural, and then advertising, as you say, is meant to overwhelm free choice.
Hartford Gold. Always believe in your soul. You're indestructible. And the world feels insecure and uncertain, doesn't it? With rising prices, crazy debts. For those who are in the United States, thank God there's a way to secure your hard-earned nest egg. Protect that nest egg. Protect it at all costs. Place it beneath a buttock. Do something sensible. American Hartford Gold makes it easy to protect your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. Yeah, like in the old days, baby. In one phone call, have physical gold and silver delivered to your door or put inside a qualifying retirement account like your IRA. American Hartford Gold has an A+ rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. Right now, they will give you up to $15,000 of free silver on your first qualifying order. I want me some of this sweet silver. This offer, though, is only for US customers. Call 866-505-8315 or text BRAND, my name, to 98899. That's 866-505-8315 or text BRAND to 98899. Get up to $15,000 of silver and protect your future in this crazy world with solid precious metals, literally made in stars.
You have all these mechanisms for overwhelming free choice, and people do not have a choice. Most people don't have a choice but to eat this stuff. People don't want to eat it when they hear about it, but particularly if you live in a Black neighborhood in this country, you have to spend a lot of your resources and a lot of your time trying to avoid those kind of foods if you're educated about it. And there's no education because the government is telling you, yeah, it's great. And by the way, they've not only bribed and captured the agencies, the Congress, the press, which is dependent on food and pharmaceutical advertising, but they've also captured the NGOs. So some of the biggest contributors to the American Diabetes Association are sugar drink companies. And probably the biggest contributor to the NAACP is sugar drink companies. To keep black people from complaining that 10% of food stamps are used for Coca-Cola and other sugar drinks. So Coca-Cola gives millions of dollars to NAACP, and which is the National Association for Colored People. I mean, it's the primary frontline organization standing up for civil rights historically, but it's been completely bought off by Coca-Cola Company, so that if you say out loud, if you're a politician, you say out loud, we shouldn't let food stamps be spent on sugar drinks. We are poisoning all the poor people in this country and giving them all diabetes. The NAACP will condemn you as racist because they say that's the only food black people can afford, and you're trying to cut off their choice to live as they want, and it's all these contrived and fictitious and convoluted arguments that, no, it's not racist. The racist thing is poisoning all the black people in this country and poisoning American Indians. And let me give you just one example of how this is genocide. Mm-hmm. That is a term I do not use lightly. But the American Indians, more than any other race in the world, have been subject to genocide, deliberate genocide, as much as Jews have, systematic genocide. Most of them, were deliberately exterminated through war and weaponry, through isolation on reservations. Today, that genocide takes place, is being completed through what, and I spent 20% of my career working with American Indian issues, treaty negotiations and litigation against big polluters that were, in making incursions onto the reservations. But what on the reservations, there's a term called white death, which is white flour, white sugar, and white grease, which is Crisco. And the American Indians have the highest chronic disease rate in the world. The Pima Indians in New Mexico and Arizona have the highest diabetes rate on earth, 90%. Because they're getting these foods. They're being systematically poisoned. The Pimas were some of the healthiest, longest lived people in the world prior to the advent of processed foods. The Pima Indians in Mexico, right across the border, are slim. They don't have diabetes. They don't have cardiac disease. They live long. They're extremely healthy. They're very durable. But right on the U.S. side of the border, where they're all being systematically inundated with these processed foods, they are dying at a younger age. I think that the average lifespan is 47 years. And it is a genocide. It is the continuation of this systematic genocide of the Indian people. And during COVID, we had the highest death rate of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths in the United States. We only have 4.2% of the world's population. We were dying from COVID at a rate of 3,000 people per million population. In Haiti, Nigeria, they were dying at 14 people per million population. We were told by Bill Gates and Tony Fauci, we got to get the vaccines to Haiti and Nigeria to save them. They're going to be wiped out from COVID. Guess what? We only 1% of them were vaccinated. 1.3% in Nigeria, 1.4% in Haiti. And yet their death rate was 1/200th of American blacks who were fully vaccinated. And Indians had the highest vaccination rate of any population in the world, 100%, because they were being paid $1,000 a piece to get the vaccine. And they had by far, far, far the highest death rate from COVID in the world. So, and it's because they were sick. CDC says the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So it wasn't COVID that was killing them. Healthy people did not die from COVID. The only people who died were people who were already sick, and it was chronic disease that was killing them, and that's caused by their food. We are mass poisoning this generation of kids.
It's interesting to consider COVID not as an aberration, but a fulmination and culmination of processes that have long been in place and were requiring, I suppose, a third act of that magnitude and that nature to sort of sort of as the denouement almost to like, you know, to with those, you know, with the comorbidities and such, to just execute the final plan, not to use, I don't want to use sensationalist language. Our new The Oracle series, our first ever group interviews designed to bring the greatest and most authoritative voices in particular subjects together for the very first time. Robert Malone, Dr. Pierre Corey, and Steve Kirsch.
What we've experienced is a globally deployed psychological bioterrorism playbook. It's well developed.
And then I started to see just global propaganda directed at essentially distorting, dismissing, and suppressing the evidence of efficacy. And I saw it as a crime.
And at that point, I knew that this was not just a coincidence. There were too many black swans over too short a period. I've never heard anything like this story in my life.
They seem to get the human psyche so well when it comes to brainwashing us and propagandizing us to the direction that they want us to go in, that you would think that they would know that pulling all of these various tactics would actually just push support towards Trump, not away from him.
Ryan Ruth, some of his posts even show that he appeared to have been working with, in his own words, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. He's doing effectively military intelligence, human trafficking of terrorists.
It's in this context that I think Ruth was kind of radicalized. He decided that while he wanted to assassinate Putin, the easier thing would be to assassinate Donald Trump.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.